Welcome to our discussion about elements of field work. My name is Jason Cates. I'm going to moderate the discussion. I'm a faculty member at Brookhaven in the math department and one of the faculty fellows for the STEM Institute. As you can see, we've got a collection of distinguished panelists here to offer some insight in field work. Before we get started, I would kind of encourage the audience at any point, if you have any follow-up questions or if you'd like one of our panelists to expand on something, feel free to just kind of get my attention by raising your hand, and hopefully we'll get to you. Okay. Well, why don't we start with introductions, and we'll start down here on my right. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your position is in STEM.
Okay. I'm Kimberly Stevens, and I'm a senior staff geologist with Hunt Oil, and I work on their North American exploration projects right now. And I actually started out in undergrad as a music major at SMU. And in the middle of my sophomore year, I switched to geology. And I took intro to geology, fell in love with it, fell in love with the field work, really. And then from there, I worked for a handful of years as a geotech. And then I went back to graduate school at Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, and got a master's degree. And then from there, I went to ExxonMobil for a handful of years, and then moved back to Dallas to work for Encana Oil and Gas, and then just recently joined Hunt this past fall. So I've been in the industry for about 19 years, and I really love what I do for a living.
Hello, my name is Patricia Lee. I am a geologist at Hunt Oil. I've been working for almost 2 years, so I'm pretty much a newbie. I started, my undergrad was at UT Austin. I started off as an undeclared liberal arts, and when I decided to do geology, it was really more happenstance than anything, because I took the course book, closed my eyes, and did this for my science course, and no joke. And I just loved being doing geology. It was intuitive, it was fun, it was one of those things where you get your hands dirty, and I like that, so that's why I switched into geology, and I haven't looked back since. I did my master's at the University of Houston and then moved to Dallas, and so here I am. I work in international exploration. My area of focus is the Middle East, particularly Kurdistan. So.
You want to go ahead down?
You want to head down, Jerry? Just snuck in behind here.
Yes, I apologize. I got lost. I started looking around this place. It's fascinating. I guess we're supposed to say a little bit about...
Yes, introduce yourself and talk about your career that you've had within STEM fields.
My name is Jerry Mayfield. I am a math teacher at Northlake College. I started off in construction. Well, I was in construction for 20 years before I actually became a math professor. Actually, before I even started teaching. I started off teaching construction. Because being in the construction field and having a friend that actually taught construction at Northlake College, I was asked to come over and teach some construction. And then I got so interested in teaching that I decided to get out of the construction field, and then went and got a degree in mathematics. So my degree in math is from the University of North Texas. And after teaching construction from 1985 to 1997, it was 19, yes, 19. I sometimes have trouble remembering back then more. I was switched over to math department, and I've been teaching math since 1997, and currently teach usually the upper level math courses, calculus and trigonometry and analytic geometry and such. That's my life story.
Okay, I started out being possessed, pretty much. I took an earth science course. I'm from Virginia. I took an earth science course when I was in the 9th grade, and I sort of got bitten by the geoscience bug at that point. We used to go west to get into the Appalachian Mountains and do caving, basically, or spelunking in the caves, basically, and we also go down to the beach and enjoy the outdoors. I pick up rocks all the time. Instead of throwing them, start looking at them, trying to figure out what the heck was in them. And it sort of led me into a career in geology. I've been doing oil and gas industry geology for quite some time. I'm an oil and gas industry geologist, by the way, but by night, I'm a geoscientist. Okay, I'm off on vacation, always working, looking at the planet, looking at the effect that man has had on the planet. And a lot of what I do away from work involves what I really love to do. It just turns out that I get to do it during the day for a living, and I get to play and move away and do it at other times when I'm not working. So here I am. So hope I can share a few things that you'll enjoy. So.
Spelunking and being on the beach, I wonder if it's too late for me to change.
No, you can always take it hot.
Well, we've got a group of students here, so maybe the idea of being out in the field is something new to us. Can you share, each of you share kind of what a typical day would be like working out in the field or on a job site or on a project site? We can start down.
Oh, I'd love to. I got started at the bottom. So if you are wanting to get in the field of construction or any field really in the STEM area, find out first of all if you can get a job in the summer doing whatever it is that they need you for. I started off at the very basics, and I learned how to build a house from the ground up. I started off digging out for the foundation, putting up forms, setting steel, placing the concrete, and then I ended up becoming a master carpentry because I fell in love with carpentry, and I built the house frame all the way up, and then exterior finish, interior finish. The only thing that I didn't do was the things that required specialized license, which were electrical, air conditioning, and plumbing. I didn't do brick masons because I did it once, got a certificate, and said, thank God that part of my life is over. That is bad, hard work. Concrete, there's a finish to it. Brick laying, it's not. There's no finish. It goes on and on and on. As soon as you finish one house, you go and do another.
Well, I'm going to speak from my experiences going out and doing field work for a major oil and gas company, for ExxonMobil. Well, my love for field work actually came from taking intro to geology. We were fortunate enough to go to the field when I took intro to geology, and to go see the rocks and to see rocks, deformed and some of the structures. I was always fascinated by that. So when I went and worked at ExxonMobil, we actually had the opportunity, say we were working deep water, and there were outcrops in, say, Southern California or in West Texas in the Delaware Mountains. And we actually went and would go study those rocks as an analog to things that we were drilling in the Gulf of Mexico or in offshore West Africa. So our typical day, well, to get planned to go out to the field, we would have meetings of what do we want to capture while we're out in the field, what are our questions and what are our learnings. And so we would prepare before we would go out to the field. Once in the field, we had teams, and say 12 to 15 of us would be out in the field, and we'd go out in 2 to 3 people, and we'd each have an assignment of what we needed to capture in the field. And they were long days, sometimes hiking up 2,000 to 3,000 feet. You would tend to have blisters on either your toes or your heels by the end of the day. Sometimes you would experience wildlife, as in rattlesnakes, coyotes, antelope, and even the strange landowner that wouldn't know that you were on their land, or if you were on BLM land, which is federal land, there would be certain people that would drive on the BLM land that would think that you're harassing the antelope that were out there, and you'd get into some interesting conversations with these people. But typically, like I said, we would have a mission or an assignment, an objective, and we would go out, and as teams we would gather the data, and then when we came back to the office we would integrate it and compile it and try to integrate it into our subsurface work. So what we know in the ancient rock, and then translate it into the subsurface. So.
I'll take it from an academic perspective. So this will be just a recap of what I did during my undergrad studies. If you do decide to do a geology undergraduate, they will generally have you do a field course. And so usually during the summer, it eats up about a month and a half of your life. But for me, that 6 weeks of time was one of the best times of my life. You go traveling all over the place, go to places that usually people don't think would be somewhere interesting. But again, you see wildlife, you see amazing landscapes, and you get to be outdoors, running all over the place, you know, and it's usually just you, your partner, and your backpack, your clipboard, and the occasional grizzly bear. So, but I mean, you're out there just as long, you know, just enjoy it. It's so much fun. You go hiking, you go everywhere, and there are not a lot of other occupations that allow you the opportunity to get out of the office and just do something you honestly enjoy, if that happens to be your cup of tea. For me, when I was doing my field work, you get up early because you want to utilize all of your daylight. You usually have an objective you need to accomplish. Like they give you a map and say, this is the area you need to map out. So you have to use skills that you learned, how to use a compass, how to take different measurements of the rocks, and you try to map out the geology of this certain area that they give you. And then when you get back to camp, you have to color it, make it look pretty for your professor, and then you turn it in. And then after that, you can relax and do whatever you want to do when you're out in the woods. But if you do decide to do that, it's a lot of fun. It's again, long hours, but generally, at least for me, I think the experience was totally worth it, and I would definitely repeat it if I could.
Okay. Patricia ignited something there, and so I'm sort of thinking that I'll touch a little bit on what happens initially when you get involved with an oil and gas company in terms of your going back and forth to the field and the kind of things that we do. Tell me, does everyone know what geology is? Okay. So do you know what sciences are involved in geology? Okay. I noticed on the agenda we've got engineers, we have physicists, people studying physics, biology, chemistry, hydrology, oceanography. All of those sciences encompass a part of what we do. And we take bits and pieces from all our information, paleo information from the planet, basically, to figure out where we should go to drill for oil and gas. Just think of us in some terms as the ultimate CSI crowd, in a way. Okay, so we're working on the ultimate cold case because we're looking for microorganisms that are billions of years old, or millions of years old, pretty much to billions of years old, basically. And these microorganisms have deteriorated, and they've been affected by heat and pressure, and now they've become an oil and gas accumulation. And our job, we're the who, the engineers, geologists, geophysicists, and sometimes the statisticians, we're the who have to figure out the other group of W's, the what, where, and whys. What are the organisms that we're looking for? Where are they currently located? Where are the accumulations currently located? Why they got there? And then there's a big how. It's like, how do we get them out of the ground in an economic way, basically? So we're trapped a lot of times in trying to get out to the field to look at things on the surface to try to figure out where we want to drill subsurface-wise. And we have to do a lot in terms of looking at present-day environments. And those are some of the things that these guys were talking to you about when they're going out to field camp. How many of us have been to the beach? Everybody, right? I'm sure of that. Okay, we've also been to the mountains, okay? We've looked at sediments that are at the base of the mountains, basically, and we looked at all the beach sands. Is there any difference between the beach sand we see in Galveston versus the beach sand we see in the Bahamas? Anybody? Yeah, what's the difference?
Location.
Color is a big difference. You know why it's a different color, right? Because there's different mineralogy, right? So we have to understand why things, from a mineralogical standpoint, we need to understand those differences. We work these things and we look for these things in the subsurface environment. And a lot of the things that we use these things called electric logs. Anybody ever seen an electrocardiogram? Okay, these things are, you have to bear with me here for a second. These things are a lot like an electrocardiogram. You see those things? They're just boop, 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 boop. They're ticking along the way. It looks like it's pretty much nothing until you get down to the zone where, let's see if I can find it. where there's a definite change, and if I'm taking too long, let me know. If there's a definite change, and you can see a difference between what's here and what's there, right? All right, this is what we're looking for. This is pay. This is the stuff we want, guys. This is what we find. Okay, here's a sample of oil that comes from offshore Gulf of Mexico. Would you pass that around, please? This is from Eugene Island, basically, I think. And here's another little oil sample from Matagorda Island. They're different API gravities. Those things are quite different. A lot of times, what we'll do in terms of being in the field, we'll have various companies, service companies that are out there working to monitor wells, okay? One of the groups that we keep out there are called mud loggers. These guys are working to monitor the fluid systems that we use to drill the wells. And they're out there for our safety. They're out there to also make sure we economically get our wells down. And what they do a lot of times, they catch samples. And they generate a log like this called a sample log. Please pass that around. Now, when you start looking at those sample logs, again, you'll see, let me point out one thing out here. I'm sorry, I'm not a sit-down kind of guy. I'll point out one thing here, okay? Again, we've got just those straight tracks, basically, with not very much happening. And then we're getting this activity on these surveys, basically, where we're measuring some of the electroconductivity or electrical response in a lot of the rocks. And that's when we're getting a lot of gas. So flip through that thing, all the way through that thing, take a look at it. The different color code that you see there, I'll make this quick. Different color code that you see there might be something related to these things. These are some cuttings from a well, basically from that well. Some of the darker stuff that you see are shale cuttings. Now these mud loggers that we talk about, when you're out in the field as a geologist, a young geologist out there, you're trying to get out there and look at these things under a microscope to try to figure out when you've gotten into a reservoir rock. There are 4 elements that we look at, right guys? Source, reservoir, trap, and seal. Those are 4 big things that we look at. Now industry's changed a little bit. Reservoir basically is the rock, the porous rock that actually contains the hydrocarbons. Take that around, open one of those and smell it.
Don't smell too
Hey guys.
Yeah.
They've all signed
Very
papers. It's
shallowly.
okay.
Hey guys, and when he keels over, you gotta pick him up, okay?
I don't really smell it too deeply.
All right.
I don't do CPR.
So really, we catch those samples and we analyze those samples in the field. And a lot of what we do early on in our careers is chase those kinds of things. So we do a lot of microscopic work on the well site. We do analysis there on the well site to try to figure out whether or not we've got a good well. Okay. Sometimes, we'll get involved in a number of different things, but we typically work those projects in the office first, and we'll do a lot of work, extensive work in the office before we actually get to go to the field to test our ideas. And those bottles that you're passing around, that's the goal. That's what we're looking for. We're trying to find economic accumulations of that oil. Okay?
So is the first step coming out before you ever get to the field, is that the seismograph work? Where you're actually testing?
I like this.
Yes.
Okay. I just brought something along. Oh, unfortunately, there's no seismic line on it. Could you help me with this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Here's what, as a geologist, you notice these guys, they're excellent communicators, okay? You have to be able to communicate, you have to be able to write, because you've got to sell your ideas to management, okay? A lot of times we'll put these kinds of displays together, and these things, if you hold it up a little bit, please, these things would hold up some sort of a geologic explanation or executive summary. We've got cross sections that are made from well logs. We'll also use geophysical cross sections to put things together that are both two-dimensional and from two-dimensional and three-dimensional surveys that we'll utilize. We make structure maps and thickness, zone thickness maps. We work on the paleo-environmental picture, basically, and also the part that the geologists really don't care for a whole lot. We work on the economics. Why do we do the economics? Anybody? Because it matters. Why do we do the economics? It does matter. She's absolutely correct.
It's gotta make money.
It's got to make money. Okay? These projects have to make money. as geologists, we really love to go out and test our ideas, but our ideas won't make any money. And boy, we really run into trouble trying to get out and drill wells that cost tens of millions of dollars to drill. Okay?
But it seems like, as geologists, field work seems to be compulsory. It seems to be just part of the nature of the job. Is there a point in your career where you have to choose either working in the field or working in a lab, or is it more kind of mixed in with both or integrated?
I've had all three. I've worked in a research lab, I've worked in the field, and I've worked in the office. So I think it depends on what your interests are, and if you're interested in all of them, I think you really can have a component of all three. I mean, that's been my experience, is that I've been fortunate enough to have been in the field, the lab, and the office, and integrating all the data types. So.
No, I haven't been here long enough to really get anything out of this. It's like 2 years, and I'm still going through the training process. So.
Well, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was working on a project where my job was in the office. However, we had some questions about the reservoir we were working, and so we spun off a project that actually involved lab work. So we hired a lab out of Salt Lake City, and I spent about 2.5 years working on a project that involved laboratory work of taking those samples and taking up pieces of rock and how do you understand the makeup of the rock, the pore space, and how do you get hydrocarbons flowing through them. So we spent about 2.5 years with the lab, and we also did field work, but then we also came back in the office, integrated all that data, and we drilled wells off of that knowledge. So.
If I may say another thing. Okay, we have to keep one thing in mind when we're talking about geology, guys. We're, the three of us at least, are all industry geoscientists, basically. Now, there are a lot of different aspects of geology. You have hydrology, there's environmental, which is a very big evolving sector of the geologic profession that's just blossoming right now. There are other aspects of geology or applications of areas that you can apply geology and other areas that you work in terms of being in the geosciences. Various sub-professions within the geosciences afford you a different percentage of opportunities to get to the field. As a hydrologist, you may spend 50% of your time in the field. We spend, at this point, we spend very little of our time in the field because the computers are so fantastic these days. Back in the dark ages, basically, when I started out, we'd go out to the field a lot of times, basically, to get a lot of these things on site. But these things now, boy, they come to us in nice Windows formats. They're really beautiful, and man, and we can whip through them in no time. You know, so I don't have to spend a week out there. They don't have to spend a week out there. We've got them working on stuff, looking for new projects, basically. So instead of having the downtime of actually being in the field. Now, there's benefit to it, absolutely. Okay, but I guess the point is that geologists work in industry, they work in government, basically they work in academia, and they work in in consulting businesses. So there's a plethora of avenues that you could get involved in terms of geoscience. So
There's also, to tie in with Jerry, I'm not sure if you've ever worked with anyone who has a geotechnical, kind of structural engineering type background, but in terms of building and constructing homes near and around, like, say, floodplains, where you would potentially have basement or foundation issues. I just didn't know if you, in your construction business, if you've dealt with anyone with that type of background.
What we dealt with dealt with on that, and they still deal with now, is the soil shifting problems where they have to go in and put piers and try to raise the foundation above the actual unstable soil. And there's all kinds of forming techniques that the engineers have designed that allows a collapsible structure that goes between the soil and the concrete, so that if there is movement, it just crushes this without ever forcing, y'all know what soil does when it expands, or clay expands. It can take a piece of concrete and drive it right up through the structure. And yes, we had to deal with that. And the engineers would come in and design it so that we could have piers that actually supported the entire structure without it ever touching the soil.
And it's interesting that lately these sinkholes have been popping up out in California, I guess. I guess definitely have some geologists out there studying what the phenomenon is that's occurring. But you kind of touched on this a second ago. I'm not sure how many geoscience majors we have. Quite possibly might have many students changing majors after this discussion. How important is it, or how often do you collaborate with other STEM professionals that aren't geologists when you're out in the field or out on a project site?
Take it around.
Well, for me, I work with a lot of engineers every day. We have reservoir engineers, we have production engineers, facility engineers, drilling engineers, people that design the well, people that design the facilities needed to process and refine all of the product that we get out of the ground. For me, I also work very closely with people that work heavily in GIS because we do a lot of satellite imagery. And so there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, for me at least. These two, they work in a different part of the world that I do. So they work with a bunch of different people, but they also work very heavily with people that are in STEM.
With engineers, and then also there's a component of geology, which Mike touched upon, where we have to take components of biology, chemistry, and physics. And recently, a project I've been working on is I've been working with a geochemist, so someone who has a really strong background in chemistry. So to understand basically how the organic material, all the, he was talking about all the critters and stuff that dies, that gets buried, and basically how their bonds break and to generate hydrocarbons. So I work with chemists and engineers.
And a big thing too, I recently went to a little microbiology meeting, basically, and that's a lot of what we're looking at right now. I mentioned source, reservoir, trap, and seal, basically, and really I should have mentioned that applies more to the conventional types of traps that we typically drill with vertical wells. Does anyone know what unconventional drilling is right now?
Horizontal?
Yeah, so now we drill a lot of wells horizontally. And here's what happens. We go with this source, reservoir, trap, seal thing, and now we figured out, wow, these shales that we used to have problems drilling through to get to our reservoirs, we'd have to increase the weight of the mud that we had in the hole so we could get through some of these pesky shales that were giving us gas, basically, so that we could get to the reservoir rock. We'd get through the source rocks so that we could get to the reservoir rock, and now the source rocks have become the reservoir rocks. And that's what we're doing with the unconventional stuff. And what Kim was touching on, boy, we're looking at stuff on a micron scale right now because we're looking at pore space that's inside of some of these microbial organisms that we put together that we've been searching for, that have been exposed to all of this heat and pressure. We're trying to generate some permeability in these shales, and that's why we're drilling laterally in those things. We had porosity and permeability in the typical reservoirs that we looked at. Porosity, okay, pore space, and permeability is connectivity of that pore space. That existed in our typical reservoirs, but shales tend to just have porosity. So now we've got to figure out a way to get that connectivity set up so that we can extract the product, basically, in an economic fashion. Okay? So yeah, we work with microbiologists, with chemists, engineers, any scientific discipline you can just about think of, yes. And I'm almost calling IT and almost a scientific discipline, because the computer programs that are being generated right now that we utilize are fantastic in terms of trying to work our way through some of these problems. And when I was kidding before about us being CSI, it's sort of an issue where we are taking bits and pieces of information from a cold case, basically, and we're trying to put that amalgamation of information together to figure out where the economic accumulations are. Now, engineers, I have a comment about engineers. Is anyone here an engineer?
Careful.
I was going to say I love engineers. They have these little things called EURs, okay? This expected rate of return, what is that? EUR?
The
Estimated ultimate recovery, excuse me, senior moment. Estimated ultimate recovery, right? So we've got to come up with a valid number for projects that we work on. So we're working a lot of times with facilities people and with the economists trying to figure out, wow, if we drill 30 of these wells or 50 of these wells, are we going to make money on them? And our engineers now, they're projecting these things out for 50 years, basically. And guys like me that have been in the industry say, whoa, I typically get most of the production out of a well first 5 to 7 years. And after that, I really don't care very much, guys. But our projections based on our type curves now are projecting things out to 40 to 50 years because of the way we have to get things out of these shale reservoirs. So, anyway.
So,
Yes, sir.
what's the time frame before we run out of oil?
Before we run out of oil?
Yeah. And what's your company gonna do when we, cause,
Well, when I was an undergrad, and I'm not going to tell you when I was an undergrad, but they said we were going to run out of oil in 20 years. I've almost been in the industry 20 years. I'm coming up on my 20th year this next year. So, and we're always finding new ways. It's really technology. It's the technology. It's some of the engineering technology of again, we never even thought of a source rock as being our reservoir 15 years ago. And I don't know. I mean, they've projected, what, 100 years?
Well, you start looking at charts. It won't be in our lifetime,
Yeah.
to put it that way. And
yeah, but
My kids' lifetime.
No, it really won't be in your kid's lifetime either, pretty much. Because there are technology drives us, okay? This whole unconventional thing with the new opportunities that it has put forward, basically, have given us an extension of life of reserves. Now, a lot of the unconventional stuff that we see happening really is evolving in the U.S. and continental North America. Okay, there are a lot of other basins all around the world, and now these basins are trying to utilize some of the technology from the U.S. oil and gas companies in their areas to try to see if they can economically generate reserves from some of those particular shale basins. Now, one thing has happened. Natural gas prices. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. In 2008, natural gas prices were somewhere around $13 an MCF. Today, it's probably close to, I don't know, Hunter, you know what it is, but $2?
Well, actually, it's up to 4.
It's up to $4. We're back up to $4.
Start your
Wow, we're good. Because it had dropped down almost below $2 at one point in time. So if we're back up to $4, that's darn good for us. But the point is, natural gas, the sale of natural gas has dipped quite a bit. So what we're looking for in these shale plays is not so much just the natural gas. We're looking for natural gas and liquids. Okay, so we're looking for oil in the shales. We're trying to free oil in the shales and any liquids, condensate that might be associated with that. So that opens up a new avenue. And you led me to this last sample that I have here, and try to, when you pass this thing around, please don't drop it on yourself. But take a whiff of that. That came from. That's a tar sand, basically, from Preston Nutter Ranch. Basically, it's a ranch that Hunt has in Utah, basically in northeastern Utah, I think. But the whole deal is that's an area where there's a lot of tar sand. And there are billions of barrels of oil that are trapped in those tar sands. We don't go after that stuff yet because there are a number of reasons that we don't go after them. One of them is definitely environmental. Okay, but there are additional areas in our some of our federal lands and in areas like this in large basins. This comes from the Uinta Basin, and large basins across the country that do have potential for additional oil. So we're really not going to run out of oil in your kid's lifetime. And keep in mind also that there are other things that are developing. Biofuels, wind, water, these are other sources of energy that we're still working on. As a matter of fact, those are sources of energy that you guys will probably work to make economic ventures somewhere down the road. So,
And they say necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So
absolutely.
whenever we need it, it will.
You'll find it.
It will be found. It's funny, you listed a bunch of different other STEAM professionals you all work with, which is probably a pretty good sample of when a lot of these students are getting degrees in engineering, chemistry, and the like. So when you think about a student at some point having to move from academia to private industry, working in the field, projects on site, what challenges did you all face that you can enlighten us about moving from academia to field work?
Well, for me, when I was doing my thesis, that was something that I definitely enjoyed doing. Like I quite literally spent nonstop working on it, and it was something that I like to do. I like mapping. My thesis work was in Gulf of Mexico, so I was looking at ancient Mississippi deltas. And the biggest change for me coming from academia to industry was the fact that suddenly I had to care about money, because I'd go to my supervisor, hey, look at this, I mapped this out, it looks really cool. And he said, okay, that's good, but what does it do for us? And so that was probably the biggest hurdle for me, was to transition out of just, this is really cool, look at the rock, to, does it produce anything? But despite that, I still use all of the skills that I learned from my undergrad and my master's, and I just tweaked how I used it. So for me, that was the biggest challenge, but again, still the same. I love it regardless of how I have to tweak how I use it. It's a lot of fun, and every day is different, and that's probably one of my favorite things about the job. It changes every day.
Kimberly?
So probably my biggest challenge is when you were working on your research, or even in undergrad doing your studies, it's kind of all about you in a way. You're watching out for yourself. But when you go into the business world, you're now working on a team. And so when you're working by yourself, you kind of set your own expectations and your own goals. Whereas when you go into work, like I said, you're working in a team, you're working with others. And so communication is big, not only with your other team members, but with your supervisor, your boss, and to sit down and to really to understand their expectations of your work products and the goals of the group and the goals of the project. So that was a bit of, not a big transition, but against a kind of an understanding of I've been by myself doing my own research, been in my own little world. So I would encourage you transitioning from academia into working for a company is teamwork and communication, and asking what the expectations are for those roles.
Jerry, yours was more of a transition from the
Yeah,
field
I was
to
going to
academia.
add exactly what I was going to say. It's kind of going from field work to academia. It's still the same concept. When you become an engineer or go into engineering, that's why we encourage you. If you want to be an engineer, go out and do whatever you can in the summer that actually applies some of the things that you're going to be working on. For example, if you want to work as a civil engineer, where you're going to see all the large construction, go out to visit a site. It'd be nice if you could work on it, but it's difficult to get a job with those. But if you could, work on a site, even if it's a laborer, and see all this math, engineering, and courses that you're taking being applied. And when you can see that they can build a bridge or just think of these giant piers that you see going up all over the area where they're building these new overpasses. They project these up in the air, out in space. They're just these big concrete arms sticking up in the air, and then they're going to set stuff on top of them, and then they all connect in a nice smooth flow. How do they do that? That's the engineer's planning, and then the application of it. It's fascinating. It's being able to see work that the engineer plans, goes out in fields and in the field and actually see it put together. And I did that. It's very nice.
Well, along that same line of getting that experience, you know, I experienced, and I'm sure a lot of these students are experiencing. Did you smell it? A lot of these students are experiencing, you know, being in college. How do you get that experience before you graduate? So, can you speak of the importance, any of you, to getting internships and things like that, being involved with companies, and how easy or difficult that is before you graduate to set yourself apart when you do?
Oh yes, as you know, as a STEM scholar, and you have an opportunity to do an internship. It doesn't even have to be in your field. It's something that goes on your resume, saying that, look, I went out and experienced an application of whatever that STEM career is that you pursued. Whether it's the one that you end up with at the end or not, it still goes on your resume and places you at a niche just a little higher as maybe somebody with the same degree.
Michael, have y'all experienced having interns out on a job site?
Well, I was going to speak from a personal experience.
Yes, please.
Before I got started, I had 4 different summer jobs, basically, 4 internships in the oil and gas industry. I got very lucky to get the first one. And once I got the first one, I worked that summer while I was still an undergraduate student. It was easier, let's say, to get the others. But here's what I recommend, okay? There are professional organizations that exist within each one of your disciplines. That if you're in biology, they're professional biological organizations, or professional chemical organizations, or physics organizations, or geoscience organizations. Please join a geoscience organization. A lot of times these guys will have free membership levels for students. I would check that, okay? Check as many of these organizations as you can. And occasionally, luckily for you, you're here in Dallas. And a lot of times some of these organizations will have meetings here. So check to see if you can join free, okay? Free is really good. It was really important to me to get free stuff when I was in college, basically.
Still is
So,
free.
okay. So I would check, you know, some of those technical organizations and try to see if you can get in free. And here's why. If you can get in, then you can start networking. And networking is a huge key, basically. If you can start to develop or start to attach yourself to someone that might be in the particular discipline that you'd like to move towards, it can help you quite a bit. Now, I'm not saying you're going to just grab somebody by the arm and just trail along with them, but at least have some sort of communication with them along the way and take advantage of some of the things that are offered for students from these professional organizations. Let me mention one other thing. One of the big things that happens, or that we are involved with the oil and gas industry, and a lot of different other industries are also involved with. A lot of guys are our age, basically, and they are, and we're, I don't know about you, but I'm planning to retire at some point here, you know. And you know, during the next 5 or 10 years, the AAPG, American Association of Petroleum Geologists, they wrote a sort of an article a few years back, talked about the great shift change. And basically, what that amounted to is a lot of the baby boomers, basically, are going to be retiring pretty soon. And we have a problem trying to infill some of the STEM disciplines back behind that. So there's absolute opportunity there for you. So figure out what you want to do and move that direction, and try to connect with as many people as you can that are in that discipline. So I talked to the microbiologists, I've talked to the physicists, I've talked to oceanographers, I've talked to a number of different scientific groups, basically, or visited with them, and we're all in the same position. We've got a big group of people that are going to retire in the next 5 to 10 years, and we don't have enough young people coming into the professions. So there you have it.
That sounds like great advice. In fact, I was in a session earlier, and another gentleman who's a physicist was giving that exact same advice. Yeah, definitely. For my other panelists, is for a couple, or for students looking still at a couple of years of college, still out, possibly even grad school, some of them maybe, at this point where they're at, what advice could you give them to prepare themselves to kind of set themselves apart when they are going to graduate and start looking for a job?
Go ahead.
Well, if you decide to go to do your master's, for example, I would suggest, for one, if you can, try to gear your thesis to something that would be applicable to industry, because that'll instantly give you one notch above everyone else who's, I mean, even if it's fieldwork definitely applies for us. So anything that you think could remotely apply to what your future job will do, I would say that's one step. The other one, again, is do an internship. That looks really good on the resume. It tells you that you've got at least 3 months of know-how. How does working industry, how do you fit in with your team members, how do you like the environment that you're in, and it tells you whether or not you are a good fit for that particular company you intern with. Do you like it, not like it? What are you looking for when you decide to find that permanent job? And that's what I did. I did an internship, and I decided it was a very good experience, but I didn't quite feel like I fit in that company. So even when they offered, I said, I'm going to look for somewhere else that I think will probably fit me a lot better. And I found a place, and I'm extremely happy with it now. So if you like, again, thesis work, if you do decide to do that, do something that's geared towards what you hope to do, and then get that internship.
But mine's along the lines of Mike, is take advantage of, you guys are here in Dallas. Actually, when I was an undergrad and had switched from music to geology, I went to a Dallas Geological Society meeting and met a couple of people there, and actually got a part-time job during my senior year, just basically photocopying electric logs. Because at that time we had to check them out from a library, because we didn't have digital stuff back then. And so we had to photocopy them. And just doing that and being exposed, and him exposing me to different techniques. And then, it's all about networking. Networking is huge. And if you know a friend of a family member or whoever that works in a particular industry that you're interested in, take them out to lunch. Go to lunch, go to dinner, pick their brain, ask them if there's any type of part-time jobs or even internships that you could get involved in, just to see if you can get in and if you're interested in it. Because you might get in there and be like, ooh, this is not what I want to do. So the networking and taking advantage of the societies that are out there and the meetings. So.
And all of these meetings, all of these societies, they encourage students to come. Like they will do a lot to get you membership. So even if they have a student fee and it's maybe too much, they will probably try to do their best to waive it for you if you really can't afford it.
Yeah.
So I do encourage all of you to join societies.
Sometimes the society itself will waive the fee, and sometimes there are members who will volunteer to pay a student's fee if they know that student is interested in becoming a member somewhere down the line. Okay, I just want to kick out a couple of things. Websites, okay, take a note. Geology.com. We're not going to be able to cover everything here today, but geology.com, even though I tried. Okay, another site, agiweb.org, okay? nsf.gov and geosociety.org. Sorry, I wanted to make sure that I kind of got
In
those.
fact, if I can get those from you after
Sure.
we break, I can make sure we get them emailed out to our
Excellent.
whole group.
Excellent. I would just say, I'm not sure you want to become a geologist. You might want to become a geological engineer, okay? A geochemical engineer, okay? So go to the websites and kind of look around and do a little bit of investigative reporting on your own. Do your own little CSI thing, and figure out whether or not it's right for you.
We quite possibly, like I said, might have some major changes after this. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists? Like them to expand on anything? Yes, ma'am.
You keep mentioning that you work with microbiologists. What exactly do they do with oil and gas?
You want to take that?
Go ahead.
Well,
you probably heard me talking.
Depending on where we are, the different parts of the world, different age of the rocks, we use paleontology, micropaleontology, that they sift through the cuttings that we get, and there's little bugs, and they stick them under the microscope, and they can identify the bug that will age date it. So then we know we're in the Triassic or we're in the Jurassic age period. So we use them a lot, especially in places like Kurdistan where, gosh, no one's really drilled a lot in there. We don't know where we are because there's a lot of faulting and reverse faulting or whatnot, so we just don't know where we are while we're drilling. So we'll work with a paleontologist or a micropaleontologist. And then there's a whole study called biostratigraphy, where they use the bugs to do stratigraphy work in large parts of basins where they can take the bugs and a bug that lives up here, and are we in the basin, are we on the shelf? So there's a lot of different things. And I gotta say, if that interests you, there is not a lot of biostratigraphers and paleontologists in our industry anymore. They really are a dying breed. So if that is something of interest to you, I'd be more than happy to introduce you and to some people that I know. Yeah.
Just one other thing too, we're talking about being in the field. What's happening a lot of times now when we're drilling these horizontal wells and we start getting these liquids out, we have to store them in tanks, okay? Now, once we store these things in tanks, these little microbial organisms, they like to eat that stuff, okay? So we have to figure out what chemicals we can put in these storage tanks to keep those organisms from flourishing as much, okay? Because they start to eat the oil or consume a lot of it, and what happens is they wind up producing H2S in these particular tanks. So when people go out to open these tanks to flow the oil back into the tankers where they're going to drive this stuff to deliver it, boy, you get the whiff of H2S out of there because of these organisms. So microbiologists are working on a number of different ways to generate different types of things to keep that from taking place. So that's sort of another area in the field where microbiologists are applicable.
Yes, just looking at this piece of rock, what can you as a geologist tell about it? And just hold it and...
It's got oil.
Not say it's porosity.
Well, actually, yeah, you want to do it? Or?
No, you go. You.
So,
It's not my wrong.
we just brought it because, okay, you can tell a number of things. Okay, first, okay, there are different tests that you can look, you can feel it, feel the texture, right? It's not exactly as smooth as this bottle, is it? This bottle doesn't really have very much pore space or anything in it, right? But you run your hand across this and you feel the difference, basically. That's because there's some actual variation in the texture. And that variation in texture in this particular case is due to the fact that there is some pore space. And we know there's pore space. When you start turning this thing around and looking at the fact that, boy, we've got this kind of stuff that's throughout the rock, you know that is porous. And it is actually a sandstone. And that's part of what you can tell too by looking at it. You observe it, you smell it. In some cases you taste it. I'm not going to. But, oh yeah, come over here. We're going to need you again. So yeah, you make observations basically. And a lot of what we do in the field, boy, you get out and you make observations. I did a lot of field work initially too in northeastern Mexico when I was in graduate school, basically, and looking at Cretaceous outcrops in the Powers Basin in northeastern Mexico. And a lot of what we did, basically, was to get out and map this stuff. And you break off pieces of the rock, and you wind up looking at it in the field, and you also wind up looking at it under a microscope after you get back to the lab. A lot of what we do, too, is trying to map the overall geometry of features, okay? But you get hands-on, you examine it, you try to figure out what the lithology is, what the fluid content is. And there are a lot of things you can tell about it.
It's an observational science, but then from those observations you have to be able to predict. So it's also a predictive science. So we have to do a lot of prediction because we don't know what's going on below the surface of the earth. We're only predicting out from known data that we have from seismic or well log data to make our interpretations. So, and hopefully they're good predictions, just like the weatherman. You know how he has models and stuff? Yeah, that's why I never get mad at the weatherman.
No, it's nothing like the weatherman.
It's a predictive science, so it is.
But she's correct. I mean, we try to make an educated analysis, basically, to come up with, to minimize the outcomes or different solutions. You know, just like you're doing any sort of scientific experiment, you know, you try to limit the number of variables so that you can understand the result that you have, basically, or the statistical possibility for a number of different results. Okay, and a lot of that is what we do when we start to try to rank projects and look at trying to apply risk to projects. What she's referring to is risk, because we're never guaranteed to drill a successful well when we drill it. There's an element of risk associated with that, and what we do is to try to mitigate some of the risk by applying the science.
What are your thoughts on the future of geothermal energy?
Me, you, or?
Well, I don't know much about it. I know that SMU has a very good program, and well, that's where I went to undergrad. So they were discussing it 20-something years ago when I was there, and I do think that there is a future in it. I don't know much about it, but if you're interested in it, I know SMU, their geology department and engineering department, I believe, has been doing a lot of work for several decades. So.
Okay. Just touch something here. Yeah, geothermal, it tends to be regional, okay?
Okay.
The regional applications, okay? Because you're going to have areas where it applies, just like wind-generated energy applies to regional areas, or biofuels may apply to somewhat regional areas. And you start getting involved with economics, okay? What does it actually cost to create the type of energy that you need to create from a geothermal source, okay? So that's why it can't necessarily at this point be as pervasive as we would like for it to be, because, you know, there are too many, it's sort of regionally allocated. You know, the sources of the geothermal energy are they only exist in certain areas. So you can really economically take advantage of those just in certain areas, I think. I mean, that's my perception right now. So I'd go look it up, you know, I mean, I'm not an expert there, but I think these things, a lot of cases are regionally driven. So.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but please join me in helping thank our guests.